All right, here we go.
Okay, it's ready. Okay, well, Irvin was about 9 years older than I was. And you asked when he went to school. Well, I'm sure he was maybe only like maybe about 5 or something. He went to country school first.
Did he go to school down here in St. Joe?
Mm-hmm. But he went to country school, and that school was located, where Uncle Caps lived. It was up on the hill on the north side of the...
Okay, we're going to talk about your brother, Irvin Bormann, today. How much older was Irvin than you are at the time?
Irvin was about 9 years older than I was. He was the oldest in our family.
How many other brothers and sisters did you
Well,
have?
it was him, and then it was Clarence, and then it was Harold, then it was me, and then it was my sister Marguerite.
Tell us a little bit about Irvin's school career.
I really don't know a lot, but I know he did go to country school, and that was about, what would you say, a mile and a little more from our home, and I think they walked. Clarence went there too, and Harold might have a little bit too, but I didn't.
Did they go to that school the whole time that they went to school?
Oh no, they went to St. Joe's School.
How many years did they go to school?
I really don't know. I think Irvin went about through 8th grades, but the teacher that was there, she was giving him more accelerated classes. So he actually had a little more than 8th grade.
Did he have many friends growing up?
Well, I think he did. He had a lot of boy cousins. They used to have a lot of good times.
What would they do?
Oh, play ball. I don't know, just be together.
Do you remember the start of World War II?
I sure do. You mean when we got into the war? Is that what you mean?
Maybe just talk a little bit about the build-up to World War II. What you saw from this side. Did you think anyone would ever end up going to Europe, actually, or Japan?
Oh, I think we did. Because they needed a lot of men. And with 3 boys in our family, it was just definitely sure that at least one would have to go.
There was a draft at the time?
Yeah. He was the oldest. So I remember he'd... what do you call it? My dad would go and get another deferment for him. It'd probably be a couple of months more, like till harvest was over or something. And then he said one time, I kind of wish he wouldn't, because he said I'd get geared up to go, and then a few more months. But then,
go ahead.
Then in the end, it just was sure that he'd have to go. Let's see, he did, actually I think he did enlist finally. And that was February 24th, 1942.
Do you know many other men from this area that signed up for the military or were drafted at that time?
Oh yeah, lots of them.
So a lot of the families in the area were affected in the same way at that time.
Oh yeah, for sure. And he was really the only St. Joe boy that was born here and grew up here and everything. There were 2 others that died from St. Joe, but one was a hired man from southern Iowa, and the other one was a boy that they moved here later and before he went into service.
Now, at the start of the war, how old were you, and what did you feel about World War II and the United States participation?
Well, we were pretty sure it was going to happen, and then after Pearl Harbor, well...
So how old were you during Pearl Harbor?
Well, 28, 38, 13.
So as a 13-year-old girl, what did you think about the world at war?
Well, of course we didn't like it, and we heard a lot about it in school. The sisters would talk about it. Didn't really like it, but, what could you do?
Now, how was Irvin prepared to fight in the war?
Well, like everybody else, he went in for a basic training, and that was, I don't know if that was just several months, I think. He went in February, and then in June...
Now, where did he go?
Fort Des Moines first. And then they were mustered out from there, and I don't remember if he... I'm not sure where he went then. He was in different places.
Do you remember any of them?
Oh, Louisiana and Florida and... what else? Oklahoma.
This was all training?
Mm-hmm.
And how did his 8th grade education hold up?
It seemed like it did pretty well, because he was accepted into officers training school. That was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It was a 3-month course. And he'd always say, either write or say, if and when I make it, because they'd so easily get demerits. Like if there was just a little dust under their bed or anything. Or if the spread wasn't on completely smooth, or little things like that that they'd get demerits for.
But he passed the school?
Yeah, he did. If it'd be now, my folks would have gone to it, I suppose, but then he didn't even consider doing that.
Had Irvin traveled at all prior to enlisting?
No, not very much.
How far away from home do you think he ever was?
I don't know if he had been down to see Aunt Stella in Kansas, maybe. And probably to Chicago, where my mother's sister lived.
So he was never more than 400 or 500 miles from home his whole life?
Not that I can remember.
Did he make any friends in the military?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
How did you find out about them?
Well, he'd write about them or talk about them. And at last, I guess I remember several of the names more, because he talked about them, and we did hear from his captain. His name was Otto Baumgartner. And another good friend was Lieutenant Hall, and he was killed the same day, too.
Now, where did Irvin go during the war? You said that he went to several training facilities in the United States, and where did he go from there?
Well, they went out to Washington, D.C. to be shipped overseas. And they landed in Oran, Africa. And then he was in Africa for a while. And then, of course, they went on to Sicily and on into Italy.
Can you give an estimate of some of those dates when he shipped out, when he went to Italy or Africa or whatever?
Well, he shipped out from the United States toward the end of May.
In what year?
May of 43. And then...
He went directly to Africa from there?
Mm-hmm. It took a while. It was, a ship.
And from Africa, where did he go?
Well, then they went on to Sicily and then on up to Naples, where they landed. If I had recently read in his diary or something, I could be more accurate on that.
So he kept a diary?
Mm-hmm. He kept a diary from the time he left the States until he died. The night before he wrote you. That night he had 8 letters. So that was kind of nice.
So how did you communicate with him during the war?
Mostly by email. Hardly ever a phone call. In those days, you just couldn't do that. And when he was in the fighting, I remember he sent a couple telegrams because he knew, everybody'd be worried, so he'd just want to say he was okay.
Was it ever possible to use a telephone?
I don't really know.
Did you have a telephone at home?
Oh yeah, we had a telephone. But I don't know, how that would, I don't know.
So from when he shipped off in 1943, did you ever see him again?
Oh no. Actually, we never saw him again, after he graduated. He was home for a 10-day furlough. And then we never saw him again.
So how did you follow progress of the war?
Oh my. Newspapers and radio broadcasts, news reports. Gabriel Heater was, I don't know what you'd call him. He always made everything sound pretty bad. Of course, folks always wanted to listen to him. Gabriel Heater, he had such a impressive voice.
And was he over in Europe, or was he reading information that was telegraphed over to the United States?
No, I think he was here.
So correspondents would send him information, and then he'd make it a little more interesting for the listening audience.
I imagine. I can't really say for sure.
Was that on at a particular time on the radio?
Yeah, I think it was towards evening. Of course, we had to listen every day, see how things were going.
How often would you receive a letter, or a person in your family?
Actually, pretty often, but, I wouldn't be able to. He was really good at writing, so we did get a lot of letters.
Now, would you write a letter and then wait for him to write one back, or did you just keep a steady stream going?
We just kept a steady stream going. He did, too.
And how did you know which letter was in transit versus what he had seen? Is there any way that you could communicate that way?
Yeah, we numbered our letters, and he also numbered his. So then we could write to each other which numbers we had gotten.
But they had to be careful what they wrote because people would censor that to make sure information wasn't being exchanged. How did you handle the censorship situation?
You mean for our letters?
Well, I think yours were probably sent over there, but for them coming back, was there any way that they would try to communicate back and forth in ways that would allow you to find out information that maybe the censors didn't want you to have?
Well, when they would censor them, then anything that we shouldn't or that shouldn't be sent, they'd just cross it out somehow. And when he got to be a second lieutenant, he did a lot of that himself. In fact, it looked like he even censored some of his own letters. But sometimes he had a lot of them to censor.
Would they ever use, like, say, a code or maybe words that you might feel differently about than a censor might, something that you had talked about at home or anything like that?
You mean about those dots under the letters?
Or any sort of a code or means to communicate?
Well, somebody told us how to do that. They said, write your letter, and then whatever you want to say that really wouldn't go through, you should just put a dot under those certain letters to make the words that you were trying to tell him. So we did that a few times. You have to find the right letters, to make the words.
But there was different words that maybe you would only know about that the censors would let pass because it didn't make any sense to them.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah.
Can you share that with us?
It's kind of funny. Back before that, the years before that, we had a painter in Algona who would come out and paint our farm buildings. And in those days, he had the outhouse. And for some reason or other, he was kind of a crazy, jokey guy, and he called it the casino. I don't know why. So Irvin could never write that he was at casino. But one of his letters, he said something like, remember what Bert Deal used to call our outhouse? He said, that's very important for us now. So that's how we knew for sure where he was.
And that was a place in Italy?
Yeah. Yep.
How did you and your family feel about Irvin going to war?
Well, we were sorry he had to go, but it was pretty inevitable. Like having 3 grown sons in the family. It would have been pretty hard to keep all of them home.
So you felt it was your duty that somebody had to go?
Yeah. And he thought he was the oldest and he should go.
And a lot of the other families in the area were sending their sons over as well?
Oh yeah, some had several in service.
So did you feel proud that he was over there when you'd hear reports on the radio and get letters and things? Or were you always, did fear kind of take over all of your emotions?
Yeah, sort of. Well, we were proud of him too, but always wondering what might happen. We'd rush to the mailbox to see if there was a letter. We had to walk way down to the corner to get the mail. So sometimes letters kind of stacked up and we'd get several at a time. Other times be longer periods between.
That would always make you worry?
Oh, kind of, yeah.
And he said a couple times he sent a telegram. When you received a telegram, was that something that would always make you a little more concerned, that seemed more urgent?
Well, we were glad to hear he was okay. That part of it I can't really remember, but somebody said it. Somebody in the family said that we did get a couple of them. That was in Italy when the fighting was really bad.
So how did you and your family find out about Irvin's death? And of course, how did that make you feel?
Well, the way we found out was the message had been sent to Bode, because that was our address, to the depot. And the depot agent just called and read the message over the phone. And that was about 7 o'clock in the morning, I remember that. February 24th, 1944, exactly 2 years from the day he left. Of course, we were shocked and yet not really surprised, but I remember I said, well, there could be a mistake. It might not really be true, but Rest of them said, oh, that sounds pretty authentic. So we felt bad, and then we got services arranged down here at church. We had a mass. And
Did all the neighbors and relatives and the parish priest and everyone try to do their best to console you at the time?
yeah, we had wake at our home, I think 2 nights. The body, of course, wasn't there, but we did say the rosary and things like that. People brought food. And then, of course, about 4.5 years later, then the body came back. Well, then we had kind of the same thing. Wake service at our home and funeral mass. And I think it was that time that we contacted all the veterans in the St. Joe area, that they would march, be kind of an honor guard. And they did.
Do you remember how many men that was?
I really don't know.
Dozens?
Yeah, it would be several dozens, I'm sure.
And they all had their uniforms?
Those that fit into them did, but not everybody could wear them.
How did you feel about other soldiers who came home? That must have been hard to see other families have their sons come home.
Kind of, but you were glad they did. Because sometimes it seemed like, well, how could anybody ever get out of there alive? And we didn't know much about the Pacific War. Well, we did. We'd hear it, but we didn't have anyone in that.
But it sounds like the fighting was very terrible. And like you say, how could someone come home from that?
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways you were very happy that other people came home. Not,
Oh, yeah.
Not really a feeling of jealousy or whatever.
Oh, I don't remember. Maybe there was a little of that. I don't know. But you'd wonder how anybody would get out of it with, either mental or physical problems. They used to talk about some that they had shell shock, and if they'd hear anything like, I don't know what it would be, a flat tire or something like that, they'd get out and get into the ditch because they were thinking of the war part of it.
Did your parents feel very bad? Did they communicate with other service people's families at all?
Yeah, with a couple of them. Lieutenant Hall's family and Captain Baumgartner. And he would write back and talked about coming to see us after he'd get out of service, but he really never did. Lieutenant Hall's mother used to write to my mom, too.
Now, looking back over 60 years, how do you feel about Irvin fighting and dying in the war?
Well, that's hard to say.
Do you wonder what kind of a family he might have had, or what he might have done
Right.
as an adult?
Whether he'd still be living now, I'm sure he would have farmed. Would have had a family, no doubt.
Is there a particular time when you think about him? Is there any events or anniversary dates or anything that make you think about what he did or meant to you?
Mm-hmm. I always think of February 1st and then February 24th. And then we see movies and programs on the television. And then I go get his diaries and I'm reading about the time they're showing. And it's pretty accurate.
Do you think that the sacrifice that he made and others at the time has made a difference in the world today?
Well, I'm sure it has, because Hitler would have just taken over everything.
Was that the belief at the time?
Well, yeah, they had to stop him. You see a lot of different programs about him and things he did.
At the
Not
time,
very
did you
good.
believe that there was no way to stop him without our men going over?
I don't know, I suppose we did. We hoped the U.S. wouldn't get into war, but after December 7th, 41, that's what happened. We were in it.
Now, have you heard any reaction from anyone about U.S. troops, maybe not Irvin in particular, but the difference they might have made over in Europe?
No, we've been to Luxembourg 3 times. That's our ancestry there. And they just really love the Americans because of the soldiers, how they, what would you say? They saved them during both wars. That terrible Battle of the Bulge went through Luxembourg and many of our men died. I've got a book about, she's a teacher, she was, She wrote a book about during the war how things went where she lived in Luxembourg. It's very interesting.
So they recognize the sacrifices that were made by the U.S. troops over there.
Yeah, they really do. I have a third cousin. He just thinks the Americans are the greatest. He took us around to different memorials and things, and he took us to Bastogne, to that big memorial place. So I'm sure if anybody goes there and says that they were in the war, they really put out the red carpet.